Welcome to my first lockdown walk video. The current lockdown rules in the UK mean that I can go walking for exercise once a day. My own protocols mean I'm keeping a distance of at least 3 meters from everyone, and not touching anything that I think there is even a small chance that anyone else might have touched. I also have a face mask and gloves in my pocket, ready for if I need them. I'm in lockdown in the beautiful hilltop village of Heptonstall, West Yorkshire, and for this first video, or whatever videos might come out of today, I'm going to walk around the historic graveyard, wander around the old village dump, and then carry on walking into the woods to do a bit of foraging, because it's springtime and there are edible plants all over the place. Sorry for the wind noises, the sun is bright and the wind is joyfully playing in it. Oh dear, it looks like the gates might need a kick, which isn't the most respectful way to enter a graveyard, but the times demand caution and I'm not going to use my hands. The building over there is the Church of St. Thomas the Apostle, and the building over here is the ruins of the Church of St. Thomas a Becket, the construction of which began in the year 1256. The original building was much smaller than it is now, and had a roof. There is no path but by the gravestones, so when walking on them I try to do so with respect. I read some of what they say and think about the lives that the people who lie here might have lived. For a long time it puzzled me why there weren't any gravestones here from the earliest centuries of the church. I looked it up, and graveyards only started to become popular as an option in about 1650. Before that, people were buried nearer to home, wherever a family could find to put some graves. Most of these gravestones mark the resting places of people who lived good, if unremarkable, lives. They were loved and lost, and the people who remembered them have passed on as well, which isn't a bad way to live. There's plenty to recommend a life with no fame or notoriety. These coins are here for David Hartley, known as King David, executed in York in 1770. He notoriously led the Cragvale coiners' gang of coin-clipping counterfeiters, who counterfeited coins to supplement their small incomes from weaving. They did it well. The extra money in circulation was subtle, but an official by the name of William Dayton was eventually sent to investigate. A member of the gang, one James Broadbent, turned King's evidence, and King David was arrested. David's brother Isaac incited 2 farmhands to ambush Dayton. He was shot and killed on the 10th of November 1769 in Halifax. This did not go unnoticed. Charles Watson Wentworth, the second Marquis of Rockingham, and interestingly a former Prime Minister of the UK, was sent to round up the gang. 30 were arrested, 3 were hanged. This particular former Prime Minister had a small part in the events which eventually led to the American Revolution. It doesn't particularly look like it, but this large stained glass window frame and the wall it sits in is the most modern part of the building. Rebuilt after a great storm in 1847, and then this church was soon supplanted by the Church of St. Thomas the Apostle, which was completed in 1854. The original building was a rather humble chapel with a much shorter tower, but as the wealth and population of the area grew, so too did the church. For the first few centuries it was a Catholic church, as opulently decorated as the wealth of the area allowed, and then the Reformation happened over the course of the 16th century, and the interiors slowly became more and more austere as Protestant worship styles and values were adopted, though the building and expansion work did not stop. These days it's occasionally used for open-air services and concerts, and I have found things on the altar and in that little alcove that suggest it is also the site of perhaps Wiccan or pagan ritual magic. Nothing there today. There are still the remains of some of the plasterwork, which long ago would have been flat and colourful and richly decorated. Could it possibly have been as beautiful as a simple fern, tenaciously growing in a sheltered part of a ruined building? This part of the graveyard is a bit of an oddity, because there's no boundary between it and the backs of the houses. They bleed into one another, tombs in people's yards, gardens amongst the graves. I think as backyards go, this one has to be one of the prettiest, even if it's not one of the most private. That there is the Heptonstall Museum, a former grammar school which tells the stories of the area since prehistoric times, including the Battle of Heptonstall during the First Civil War in 1643. It's closed for now due to the pandemic, but quite a nice little museum when it's open. I don't know if this is going to be readable, but I am filming it in high enough resolution, so if you want to read it, do increase the playback resolution to maximum and pause the video. There's almost always a sense of calm to be found in graveyards. Even amongst the largest cities, they can be little islands of peace and solitude. The people here, whether they're visitors or residents, tend to be fairly quiet. Now I hope that this doesn't look too distressing, me walking over graves. If there was a path, I would take it. I'm deliberately placing my feet on the edges and gaps, trying to avoid actually walking on top of people, even though it is very hard to know if these gravestones are actually over people. Many of them are clearly not in their original positions. See here, some of the older ones lie on top of younger ones. And here, on the grass, there are almost certainly burials, but no markers for them. This is not the case in the newer part of the graveyard, where everything, the church included, starts looking more formal, more straight, more upright. The last time I was here, I noticed that just before the northwest gate, lying completely disregarded, I have no idea how it has managed to stay here, a little piece of clay pipe stem. This was probably smoked at least 70 years ago, probably more. I'm guessing it hasn't been actually on the path all that time. More likely pieces of the pipe have laid here, and a bird might have picked one of them up and dropped it. Or who knows, it's not something I'm going to take. And although I don't think it at all likely that someone has touched this pipe stem, I'm now going to disallow my hands from touching anything indoors before they're thoroughly cleaned. Touching things is a hard habit to break. My camera will sit in a quarantine box for 2 days too. Anyway, on with what can loosely be called the tor, and they're very faint, but inscribed on this back wall, which, based on the earliest graves in this section, is an early 19th century extension to the graveyard, there are many mysterious initials. There is no easily found reference to these online, so we're going to have to rely on my unreliable memory, which suggests that during a primary school tour of a graveyard long ago, young version of me was told that the wall was paid for by subscription, and the initials represent the donors, who might have been hoping for a reward in the afterlife of their small public display of piety. I am, of course, open to the possibility that younger me was misled. If you know what they represent, please do say in the comments. These plants are known as Alexanders, or horse parsley, and they are edible, tasting somewhat similar to celery, but do not pick them without an expert's identification. They have close poisonous relatives that look very similar. Oh, and down here we have rosebay willow herb, which is also edible, although you should only really eat the top, which tastes a bit like lettuce. The lower leaves start tasting bitter, or the tender young stalks can be cooked like asparagus. You'll notice I'm not picking any of either plant. I don't think the residents would particularly mind, but it's not really respectful foraging in a graveyard. Better to leave it for the wildlife. Still quite a way to go. We're heading to the corner where lies Champion Murgatroyd, who started reasonably humbly in life as a farmer and corn miller and died a wealthy mill owner in 1872. I know a little bit about this man because I know his house inside and out. And while he was increasingly wealthy throughout his life, he did not wish to display it ostentatiously. He lived in an end-of-terrace house, outwardly no different from those around it, and surrounded by mill workers, including, presumably, some of his own employees. There is an oddity inside his house, though. In the living room, as a lintel above the fireplace, there is a gravestone. Champion Murgatroyd was a pious man, a church warden amongst several upstanding pillar-of-the-community type roles he took on. So was this a reminder to himself of his own mortality, or was it just part of a famous Victorian cultural obsession with death? I shall ask him if I ever get to meet him. I don't think I'd want my tomb to be in a cage. It would inevitably spark the inappropriate thought in casual passers-by that it is either a snobbish separation from the poorer folk who could not afford such blacksmithery, or that perhaps it was put there to keep the resident in. More Alexanders, and let's head back towards the path. This pinnacle was struck down by lightning from the southwest corner of this tower on April 5th, 1875. So, timing our exit to avoid having to obviously avoid other people, let's head towards the gate. A last look around at the churchyard, the church, the glorious spring day in a lovely old place, and the young addition of a rowan tree, traditionally planted as protection for a place from witches, fairies, and evil spirits. I wonder if there will be such ancient thought given to the trees at the entrance of a new graveyard just across this track. No. I'm not sure what tree that is without the leaves being out, but it's neither a rowan or a yew tree. Oh well. This section of the graveyard is still open to new arrivals. It was added to the church property in 1917, right at the height of the Great War, although I don't think that that was a deciding factor in the purchase. It was just that the older graveyard was full. That squeaking sound is a very little dog making a lot of noise playing with a chew toy. We're heading to see the most famous grave in the graveyard now. There lies an American writer who married the English poet Ted Hughes. I personally think her writing was more engaging and brilliant than his, albeit generally focused on sadder topics. Sylvia Plath, whose work affects people so deeply that they come from across the world to pay respects at her grave, and some, while they're here, take it upon themselves to try to erase the name of Hughes, who, according to two of Sylvia's letters to her psychiatrist, was abusive to her. Perhaps I shouldn't have brought the tour to end here, but I have come to this grave with fond regards more often than any other, not just because she is local to me, but because she was an immensely talented writer who inspired many, myself included. There appears to be some green alkanet growing. It's related to borage, and the bright blue flowers are edible. Although it's generally seen as a weed, it would be a very odd choice indeed to purposefully plant on a grave, and yet I don't see any of it elsewhere in the near vicinity. This has been a considerable departure from my usual content. I hope my usual audience has found it enjoyable so far, and any new viewers view my complete lack of guided tour experience with patience and tolerance. If you have enjoyed it, then please give it a like, a comment, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell icon to get notifications of new content when it goes live, share if you know other people who you think might enjoy it, and I have a Ko-fi account linked in the description for if you wish to buy me a hypothetical coffee. I hope you're all keeping safe and healthy and helping people if you can. Thank you all very much for watching, and for now, goodbye.